Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. And welcome back to our Preview Day online series, our preview program online series. And today we are going to be going over the application cycle to get into graduate school, as well as the general timeline of this application cycle. We're also going to dive deeper into how exactly to apply to graduate school and also what materials you'll need to do that. And this series is facilitated by a group of students that you have seen within, and we are of the population biology program at Davis. And you will see them on this call along with other grad students and postdocs who are going to be serving as your individual mentors. So can the grad students and postdocs please wave their hand? And you can kind of pop out your chat to see all of us if you'd like. Awesome, thank you. And today is our second session. I want to remind everyone that we do have office hours this Thursday at the same time, 5 to 6:30. And this is going to be a little bit more casual. We don't have materials for you guys, but we are going to be available for you to ask questions and just chat with us and maybe meet other participants as well as the graduate students hosting and mentoring the sessions. And so this is a 90-minute work session today. So this is an introduction, and there are resources to dig deeper, and we are peer facilitators here to guide your discovery, but we are by no means experts. So we're here to learn together, and we are also here to learn from you. So we have some session norms. Please keep your video on if you are, and stay muted unless talking, and then ask questions in the chat. Or raise your hand. And then we also hope that you will be respectful and curious and that everyone is coming with a little bit different background.
And by the end of the session, we hope that as participants, you will understand the overall application process and timeline, be better equipped to talk about specific research interests, and be able to translate your experiences and interests into a competitive application. And before we really dive into the material, we do want to just take a moment to let you know that we're going to be presenting a lot of information today. There are many, many steps to the application process and a lot of insider information that we want you to have. But that also means you might not absorb everything in this presentation. And that's okay. You can revisit them later. Someone right now is going to put a link to our slides that we're going through today, so you can check those out. They're also going to be put up on our website afterwards, so you don't have to open them now if you don't want to, but you can follow along on the slides if that's useful to you, and everything that we're saying are in the notes of the slides, and so it should be a nice to reference back to after this presentation. And of course, as Danielle said, we have office hours, you have mentors, and so feel free to reach out to us or your mentors to ask more questions or get any more clarification.
Okay, and our session today will be split up into 3 different sections. So the first is going to be talking about preparing to apply to graduate school. And then the next will be about the actual application process. We are going to format this with a timeline, as well as there will be time for questions in small groups and as a whole group for additional clarity. And at the end, we will do a little mini workshop on how to talk about your research. So please be thinking of a few sentences that you would describe to someone else how what you are researching or what you want to research.
Curious to see how many future versus past people there were. But anyway, we're going to start talking about preparing to apply to start us off. And so I'd like everyone to think about what makes a great applicant. I think it's a good place to start because then you can use those qualities and think about how to make yourself stand out. And so everyone type an idea or two in the chat about what are some qualities that you think professors are looking for in prospective students. So students who are applying to join their lab or their program. Let's see what we get. Okay, passion for research interests, research experience, demonstrated engagement in the field, curious and resilient, writing skills, curiosity, leadership skills, more curiosity and passion, ambition, drive, independent thinking and problem solving, more drive, knowing what they want from the experience, experience in fieldwork, lots of curiosity. It's good. Curiosity is very important. Progressive, open-minded, forward thinking. Wow, there's a lot of great ideas. You all have it already. That's awesome. So we're gonna share some things that we came up with, and we're focusing more on programs that are research-based. So you're gonna be writing a thesis or something. So priorities might change a little bit if you're doing a professional master's program. So just, keep that grain of salt if that's what you're more interested in. Okay, so the main part of a thesis-based master's or PhD is doing research. So it's conceiving and carrying out a research project. And so the more important qualities you want to focus on are things that let you do that. And so one of the primary things that people look for is research experience, like many of you pointed out. And I think you all pointed out basically everything. So I'll just be covering everything in the chat. And so this shows that you can engage in daily research activities, and it looks even better if you followed through with projects to completion or had more responsibility on these projects. That just gives the person looking at your application more confidence that you'll do well as a student in their program. And so it's helpful to have presented your work before or to have publications, but by no means is that necessary. And we're focusing more on research experience to think more about the research process rather than having worked on research topics that are closely aligned with a lab that you want to join. And that's because very few professors really expect that. Some do care if you have specific skills that you can use in the type of research that they do in their lab, but mostly that's not as emphasized. It's just, can you engage in research? Can you generate ideas? Can you carry them out in projects? Okay, and then next, as many of you mentioned, curiosity and interest in research are highly valued because it shows that you're motivated to identify and pursue open research questions. And so it's also important to show interest in the program and labs you're applying to, which includes knowing why you want to join. People will simply take you more seriously as an applicant if they see that you're serious about them. That's next click, Danielle. Cool, okay, and then the next one is determination and perseverance. For a PhD, that means pushing through when your projects aren't going as planned, teaching yourself new concepts, or trying at something again and again until it works. So that could mean submitting multiple applications for research money until it's finally awarded to you. And so these are the most important qualities that people are really going to be looking for, but there's some other qualities that will help your application, and you want to point to some strengths. And so I'm going to show this on the next slide. The green is on the top, everything we talked about, and these other tiers are in yellow and orange. So these are not as strongly, I'll say them first. Okay, so background knowledge in the research area of interest, programming and quantitative skills, written and oral communication skills, potential to network and collaborate, and leadership and ability to work in teams. So you want to have some strong suits here, but they're not as strongly emphasized because these are things that you're going to get better at in grad school. And so no one expects you to be perfect. There are things you can improve on, but once again, being able to point to these strengths gives them confidence that you'll be a successful grad student. And something that's very important is that every professor is going to prioritize these qualities differently. There is not one right fit or formula. And so it's a good reminder too that, if one professor doesn't necessarily express interest in you, that doesn't mean that another professor will not express interest either. They just value different things.
Thank you. Yeah, so now we're going to talk about finding a mentor. And this could be different from the advisor that you do research under. Actually, it might be good that it's different because that means you have more eyes looking at your application materials. And so people who could serve as these kind of mentors are faculty, of course, as well as postdocs and graduate students. And so yeah, these are great mentors because they, all have been through graduate school and some more recently than others. And so, yeah, the application process is a great place to get advice for applying to different programs. This can look like providing questions that are necessary to ask during the interview or sharing knowledge of programs they know about for your specific interests. And so this is a great person to practice that elevator pitch on. They are also good candidates for writing letters of recommendation. You usually will need multiple, so this is good to get, a few different folks. And then reviewing application materials is another way they can help you out. So they can look over your CV, your statements, your, general research emails, even if you, or not research emails, but emails to professors that you will reach out to. They could even help you format that. And so kind of, if you don't have this kind of mentor, there's a lot of ways to do this. You could look for professors within your school's biology department. So usually there will be a web page that houses where all of the faculty members in your department are. And you can look through these faculty members and get an idea of who is accepting undergrads and what their research is all about. And then reach out to those for the topics that do interest you. And also consider that your mentor could be a postdoc or a grad student. And, like I said before, they're great mentors, and you have a grad student mentor now. And so these are people that have done this a lot more recently than, maybe faculty members have. So they might have a more up-to-date knowledge on applying to graduate school. And now let's go dive into the application process. So
yeah, so there's a written application. So we're just sorry to say, we're giving you an overview now, and we're going to dive in deeper. So this is just so you know where we're going. Typically in December, you submit a written application, and the materials are a personal statement. Sometimes they ask for a diversity statement. You'll need to attach your curriculum vitae, which is a little different from a resume, and we're going to call that a CV. 3 letters of recommendation. Sometimes you're asked to send scores from the GRE, which is a standardized test that people take for grad school admissions. You need to send your academic transcripts, and you'll be asked to list the names of professors that are affiliated with the graduate program whose labs you're interested in joining. And after you submit your application, an admissions committee then reviews them and invites top applicants for typically in-person interviews. So with COVID, they're probably virtual. Perhaps they'll be virtual this coming year. It's still kind of uncertain. And they're most likely in person for PhD programs, not necessarily masters. But this admissions committee is composed of professors who are affiliated with the program that you're applying to. And sometimes there's a student representative on the committee as well. And when they're evaluating applications, they're taking into account how excited a professor is about you joining their lab. And by that, we mean that a professor is telling the admissions committee that they would like you to be invited to interview. Applicants are almost never invited to interview if that does not happen. And those professors are most likely not really looking through those applications to find students. They already have a set of students in mind that they're going to recommend. So very important, what you need to be doing is making connections with potential faculty advisors before submitting your applications. And those professors need to be the same people that you're listing in your application, because the admissions committee will see it and then they'll ask the professor like, oh, did you know this person? So you want to have that consistency. And in general, the more professors you list on that application, the less serious you're going to seem about each one, and the less focused your research interests are going to appear. And so a good rule of thumb is don't list more than 3 and only list the professors of labs that you are genuinely interested in joining or are more curious about and are considering joining. And also a professor might be affiliated with multiple programs. And so you should be asking this potential advisor to see what programs they take students through and if they have a certain recommendation. Sometimes people apply to multiple programs to work in one lab and they decide later which program they'll join. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into who decides which applicants get accepted. We just touched on 2 groups involved, the program's admissions committee and the potential advisors. The admissions committee focuses more on program fit. For example, whether one's general research interests, research experience, and coursework taken fit with the program's theme. They also want to make sure that you'd at least get along with other people in the program, but more than that, that you would be an active participant in the research community. And so, as I said, they're comprised of people that are of professors affiliated with the program. And then there's the potential advisors, which emphasize your fit in the lab more. And so that might be, do your specific research interests match with theirs? Do you have the relevant skills to do work in that lab? Are you going to work well with other lab members? And each program differs in how much decision-making power each of these groups get. But in most ecology and evolution programs, students commit to an advisor before starting. So the potential advisors usually get a very big say. If you click, Danielle, thanks. But most importantly, you will not get accepted without a potential advisor saying they want you to join their lab. So maybe an admissions committee is super excited about you, but no professor is really interested in you joining their lab. You will not get an offer. So that's why connections with professors are very important. Cool. And I'm just going to say this one more time to make sure it's clear. And you can say it with me if you'd like. You need to make connections with potential faculty advisors before submitting your application. It's not worth submitting your application if no one showed interest in you. I made this mistake when applying. I never heard from those universities. That's money I'll never get back, so please don't make the same mistake.
Now let's talk about some of the costs of applying. This is my kind of biggest concern, as this can get a little bit pricey. And so, you know, usually we'll give you a little bit of overall costs that are associated with most programs, as well as some ways to mitigate those costs. So first, let's talk about the application costs. This is $50 to $100 usually. I know that Davis is on the more pricey side and might be over $100 this year. And so some ways to mitigate that is by looking into the application fee waiver programs on websites. Usually this is on the same page that they state the application fee. And so usually you need proof of some financial need or a pipeline program. But if you are in a situation where you do need an application fee waiver, I would recommend reaching out to the financial or advisor or administrator of the program. So maybe that is the main administrator of the program, to reach out with your concerns. And usually they you know, I can't speak for all programs, but that's better than not sending that email. Another cost is the GRE. This is $205 per test. However, not every school will require the GRE. So you could be applying without even taking this test. And so some ways to mitigate this, if you do have to take the GRE, which we'll talk about a little bit later. There is a fee reduction program per the site, which is ETS. And this, again, is similar to the application fee waiver, where you may need to address prove financial need or pipeline program admittance. And then many programs are ditching the GRE, and you have 5 free scores to send. So you could basically send your scores out to 5 schools that you know you want to apply to, and boom, you saved yourself $125 at 25 a piece. And then the in-person interviews can vary by cost. And so this can be anywhere from partially to fully paid for by the program. And so this is usually when you fly out, you've been invited to speak or drive out or virtual under COVID. We did our last interview under COVID-19 in 2020, sorry, 2021, and we had it online. And so this might be, they're mitigating that cost almost pretty much entirely. And so costs vary from programs here. So while there are some travel, food, and boarding costs, most of the time programs will pay for that, or they will reimburse your travel expenses.
Okay, now we're going to walk through different steps of the application process and show you roughly when you should be taking those steps on the timeline. And we're building up to applying in December. And just know that this is just a guide. People are going to differ when they take each step. So these are just suggestions to keep you on track. Oh, right. And we're starting with identifying potential advisors, which you want to do by late September. So there's a few ways that you can do this. But before you start a search, it's just good to start by identifying what research topics interest you. And then a common approach is to read research papers on those topics. So if you enjoyed a paper, you find out which labs contributed to it. The first and last author tends to make greater conceptual contributions, so that's a good place to start. They usually have a website or a Google Scholar page where you can find out more about them. And I guess especially towards the beginning, it's a lot to read through whole research papers as you go through. So maybe it's useful to start with the abstracts, get a sense of, do you like the questions they're asking? Do you like the type of approaches that they use? As a first way to filter through. And also there are review papers on broad topics. So if there's a broad topic you like, that could be a good place to find useful citations. Look through their citations to find papers that could be interesting to you. And then another good approach is to ask for advice from your advisors, whether they're research or academic advisors, your course professors, and your TAs. Like Danielle said earlier, these people are always really excited to help you out. And a tip to keep in mind is that people with research interests closer to yours can give you more specific advice about professors or programs that you might want to seek out. You can also sample a bunch of different research by attending scientific conferences or watching talks that have been posted online. And there's a ton of those now. And on our website, we'll have some places that you can find those talks. Many conferences have now gone online. Some are free or inexpensive, so it's worth asking your research advisor whether they could help you attend or if you could present at one of them. And conference formats are nice because you have the additional opportunity to connect with members of labs that you're interested in. Although that's kind of easier when it's in the in-person format. Some people like to take a reverse approach. They read about programs first and then browse through their faculty. Just take note that programs don't always go by the same name and they differ in scope. So for example, I'm in population biology, which spans ecology and evolution, but it goes by a different name, while some universities have a broader biology program. Some other things that you can look through are seeing professors that have funding for research, because oftentimes professors can't take students because they don't have research money or grant money to pay you or your research. And so you could help narrow your search by searching for who has active research grants, meaning they currently have funding, by looking online. Two major organizations that fund research are the National Science Foundation and National Institute of Health. Since they're part of the government, you can actually access and see which professors have received grants and learn more about those funded projects. And so we have links to those on our resources page. And last, you can find postings for graduate student positions online. Sometimes professors who have funding advertise that they want to take on students. Sometimes they put up a job posting with RA, which means research assistant, but it actually refers to a graduate student working for them. So that's another place that you can check it out. But while they show professors that you know are interested in taking on students, they're not the only professors that are interested in taking on students. So you should still be reaching out to professors even if they did not post anything online.
I'm muted. Thank you, Sivan. Now we're going to talk about the GRE. This, again, you can kind of time it a little bit flexibly, but anywhere from June to October would be a good time to take that test. And so, but first we want to talk a little bit about the GRE, and it's important to take the time to tell you with a lot of support and data, the GRE has no correlation with success in graduate school. We have a few articles in our resource page that highlight this innate bias of the test. The GRE is actually better at predicting sex, race, and socioeconomic status than it is at predicting any kind of success in graduate school. And so for this reason, lots of programs are moving away from the GRE. However, if you do apply to a program that does require the GRE, here's a few tips and tricks. So there's a few, so there's 3 parts of the GRE: verbal, quantitative, and an analytical writing. And so a lot of programs require it or use it differently in their application. So you should read if they have any material on how they use it on their application websites and pages. And then often one strategy that programs use to the GRE is to evaluate it alongside other materials such as GPA and coursework. And so this kind of more holistic application review is becoming increasingly popular. And so, that is to say that people with low GRE scores do go to graduate school and are very successful in graduate school, and that the test really has no bearing over what you can achieve when you go to graduate school. And so programs are learning that more quickly and are realizing that and getting rid of the test. So you may not even have to take it. And yeah.
Okay, next we'll talk about asking for letters of recommendation, which you probably want to do by mid-November. Again, it's just a guide. It's okay. Depends on who you're asking. So a great letter, I'll wait for the next slide. Yeah, a great letter provides examples of how you demonstrated important qualities for success in grad school. So think about what are the qualities of a successful or a good applicant? Who can you find that can give examples that show that you have those qualities? So you should ask people to write them that you trust to speak highly of you, to submit by the deadline, because if they don't submit it, no one is ever going to see your application, and who provide examples of your work ethic, like we said. And some tips that we have are that, I'll wait for them to come up. Yes, the earlier you ask for a letter, the more likely they'll write one. They're probably getting requests from a lot of people. And so if you're on the earlier end, they're more likely to accept. You should also send reminders to letter writers as the deadline approaches. And when you put them down as a letter writer, they get an email and they're told to access a different portal. So every school gives them a different email and it can be hard to keep track of. And so it's useful to provide them a spreadsheet of all of the programs you're applying to and their deadlines so that they can help keep themselves on track and make sure they didn't miss anything. And then once you're done with them, it's useful to give them your CV and your personal statement so that they can just read it over, see what you're interested in, and make sure that they didn't miss out on any of your strengths when they're writing your letter.
Okay, and this, now we're going to talk a little bit about the CV, or curriculum vitae. And so what a CV is a comprehensive statement of your educational background, as well as your research background, teaching experience, and broader impacts. So there's kind of a lot of information in this one document. And so kind of the function is that this is a standard way that academics present their credentials, right? And so it's quick, straightforward, and it's a way for someone to learn about you. And so it says see the handout, and what that means is see the resources page on ways to format the CV. And we have a few tips and some tricks for you guys to kind of format your CV in a more in a good way. And yeah, but once you have it, I mean, it's a good way for someone to learn all about the things you've done, the experiences you've done, the awards you've gotten, and the grants you've gotten. So feel free to include all of that stuff in your CV. Okay, and so we have covered a lot of information, which is listed on the slide. So we've got what makes a great applicant. We've talked about who decides who gets accepted, as well as financial considerations to applying, identifying a potential advisor, the GRE, recommendation letters, and the CV. So now we want to ask, is there any questions? We're going to kind of do this in the same way where you guys can we'll do about 4 minutes here, like a 4-minute or so break, or ask questions and we'll be happy to answer them. Okay, and I see our first question was, where can we find the handout? Sivan has posted the link in the chat with our supplemental materials as well as the CV examples. And I'm now going to stop no, I think I will keep my screen up. Feel free to. Awesome, Katie.
Yeah, I had a quick question. One of the things that I've been kind of curious about is when applying to, let's say I have one program in mind and like one very specific PI in mind, will there ever be a time on an application where they'll make me select more than one PI to possibly join their lab? Or, how would you handle that situation if there's really only one PI you're interested in? Would they ever ask me to identify others?
That's a great question. So I would say is look out for that if you're applying to a program that requires rotations. If that's the case, they will probably ask you for a few different professors and you'll do rotations in that program. And so for the other, you may come across a program that asks you for additional faculty members, but make sure you're putting the one you really want to work with first. And unless there's someone you might want to work with, I don't know if I would put anyone else. But Sivan, do you want to maybe chime in?
Yeah, I think what you said works. I'm not sure that they ever ask you to write more, but if you want to, you can write an additional one that has like a more similar research focus. That would be like a person you'd get advice from while you were in grad school there. But it's okay to do just the one most of the time.
Thank you guys so much.
There's a few questions in the chat. The first one, I believe, is how many programs would you recommend applying to? That's a good question. And it's a little bit of a numbers game. And everyone's answer is going to be a little bit different. I applied to, I applied to 7, but my initial email was, I think, like 20 or plus. So we'll go over that a little bit too, how to email and how many, folks to be talking to. But yeah, I would say everyone's answer is going to be a little bit different and only apply to the folks that you have actually had a conversation with. I think that is more important than the numbers game.
Yeah, and the nice thing about applying in this way, while it's hard to make those connections ahead of time, you have a better idea of what your chances are once you submit the application. Because if the advisor encouraged you to apply, that means you should apply. If they did not, or they did not respond, then don't apply. But you want to cast that wide net early, like Danielle said.
There's another couple questions, and we may not have time to go over every single one, and because I think we have 1 more minute until we have to go back. But we have gotten, so one says, can you ask for recommendations from non-academics or professors, non-professors, like a supervisor or coworker? In this sense, I would say it depends on who those coworkers are. If it is like a job that is in kind of a more E&E background or something that could pertain to research, perhaps including one would be okay, but you really want those to be people who can speak on your research experiences. And if that is, supplemented by a professional experience, then I think it's okay to include those folks too. Okay, and I believe that there was a few more questions, but we would really, and we will definitely get to all of them in the chat. So keep an eye on the chat, but we do have to move on to be able to keep up with the rest of the program. Okay, and so now we're actually going to talk about that, emailing potential advisors. And so first, we're going to talk a little bit about writing this email. So as Sivan mentioned before, we do, you should read a few papers, or at least their website, maybe not papers for the email, but definitely their website, to get an idea of the stuff that the advisor studies. And so this is also stuff you're going to bring up in your email. So, but first you probably want to talk about your interests. So this is a few sentences specifically to talk about your research projects that you're currently working on. You want to give them some detail here about what the question is, what the system you're working on, and a few sentences on the subjects you're interested in studying in grad school. And then you want to kind of make the connection to how you would be a good fit for their lab. So this might start out with a couple sentences stating what you like about their research, what you find interesting, what you're curious about. And then after that, you want to follow with a few sentences on how you would contribute to the work in their lab. And so this could look like making connections from your past work to their lab, and maybe hypothesizing some projects you could potentially see yourself working on. It does not have to be very detailed. You do not have to have your dissertation lined out to email advisors, but you do want to give them some idea of what you would want to work on when you come to their lab. And then you want to ask a question about their research. And so this is a great strategy to get them engaged and talking to you and having that conversation already starting about their research, as well as following up with asking if they are taking grad students or if they would be available to talk over a video call. And this will kind of open that door this will open that door to this professor to ask you, yeah, sure, let's set something up. So remember a few tips. Introduce yourself at the beginning when you are talking about, before you launch into your research statements, and then keep your email to the point. It's okay if you format it however you like. However, if it is longer, do keep in mind that folks tend to kind of not read through all of it, especially if it is longer. And also include your CV. And this will give them a nice way to kind of read more about what you do. And so now we're going to talk about actually the strategy to email potential advisors. So first thing we want to say is cast a wide net. And so this is because you want to find as many professors who are interested in working with you, because that doesn't always mean that they'll have funding for you, right? So this will give you a little bit of wiggle room in case some of them don't respond, which is extremely common and almost most of the time has nothing to do with you or your expertise or experience. It usually is because they're not accepting students, or they get a lot of emails and it's just lost in the sea of emails. So that leads me to the next point. So expect to hear back from, or do not expect to hear back from everyone, and expect that some of them aren't taking students, and that's okay. And so follow up with the advisors that don't reply so that you can kind of keep track of maybe bump them. Maybe they just missed it, right? That second point. And now we're going to talk about how to talk with them. And so kind of going back to the timeline, these things kind of happen a little bit synonymously sometimes. You could be doing this process for, a few months, but you definitely want to have, have conversations with them before that December time, that time of December. Okay, and so now we're going to talk about, after you correspond over email, you'll be likely invited for a video call with some of the professors that you do reach out. And so this is a two-way interview. The advisor is using this to gauge the applicant. However, you should use it to gauge the interviewer as well. And so you want to be asking them lots of questions about their research, their lab, and all different kinds of things of what it means to be a graduate student at that school and in their lab, so that you can kind of gauge a little bit if this is going to be a good fit for your preferred mentoring style and subject matter that you want to study. And so during this interview, you want to make sure that you are talking about yourself and your research interests. So this is going to provide them more detail with what you want to do and why you think you'll be a good fit for their lab. And then you want to remember that this is not usually super formal. You don't have to get on, your suit or anything. This is, something that is just going to be getting to know one another, and that's usually how these meetings go. And they're usually conversational, where you share your interests and ideas. So how to prepare for this meeting is you want to read the PI's website. That will give you an idea of their more recent projects that they will be able to talk about a lot, as well as a few of their more recent papers. This is when you kind of do want to have one or two of those papers under your belt that you might have a little bit more to talk about. And practice talking about your background and research interests prior to going into the meeting as well, to kind of really nail out what you want to say. And now we're going to talk a little bit about personal and diversity statements. We had a whole workshop on this, and we are working on getting that online for you guys to access. So we'll keep this fairly brief. So the personal statement describes your preparation and motivation typically. Usually this centers around interests, specializations, and career goals, and it helps to assess the program fit. The diversity statement is usually on how you contribute to the diversity of the graduate program, or a prompt similar. We went over Davis's diversity statement prompt, so feel free when that is up to look at that in our workshop. We also, it's also about your personal background. However, we do want to mention that this, the diversity statement often talking about your backgrounds can cause a triggering of emotions, and this can be maybe a more emotional process of writing this statement. So be careful of triggering emotions that might come up as you craft your statement. And on the same vein, we also mentioned this in the workshop, that we'll start by reading this quote. White America asks people of color to tokenize and exploit themselves in order to gain acceptance into programs and institutions that they are otherwise barred from. And so, when you're writing these statements, be strategic, authentic, or a mix of both. And, this is, we have some resources here on the slide if you'd like to click through that to read more about this kind of phenomena. So, as Elena said in the workshop, white and privileged admissions committees like to hear nice stories about trauma wrapped up in a neat bow, right? But you don't, you and your story is valid, and you deserve to go to graduate school regardless of, this phenomenon. Okay, now we've gone over all of the parts of the material of the application, and we've finally arrived at December. So that means it's time for the application to be submitted. And so application deadlines usually fall between December 1st through 15th. There might be some exceptions, so check in with that to the programs you're applying for. all of the applications are reviewed at the same time. So it does not behoove you to put in your application earlier. Actually, it can hurt you, especially if you're kind of in a time of doing some research and you maybe had a poster you didn't present from June, or you presented from, before June, and or what you, so that is to say, it's okay to wait until kind of closer to the deadline to submit it if you are on track to submit it. And that might help you beef up your CV and stuff a little bit more, and have a better idea going into graduate school. And then, of course, check each program's application to see if you can qualify for those fee waivers. And if you do, use them.
Okay, so we just talked about a bunch of those application materials and the process of applying all the way up to submitting your application in December. And so kind of as a review of this, we wanted to help you understand how important each of those are, to think about maybe where do you want to put more of your time. And so we surveyed 31 faculty from UC Davis who take students through population biology or the grad group in ecology, but they also take students through others. It's just who we surveyed. And we asked them to rate their how important they thought these different materials or parts of the application process were for your admissions. And so a rating of 1 means that this is not at all important. A rating of 5 means it's extremely important. And by important, we mean how much are they using these materials to evaluate whether you're a good fit for the program or the lab. And so I ordered these different categories by highest to lowest rating. So starting on the top left, the highest rating is the part of the personal statement that covers your research background and interests. But still, you see there's a lot of variation there. Next highest rated is your initial email to this potential advisor. So I think that many people thought this was extremely important, which is echoing everything that we said, make those connections. Next is the personal statement, the part of it where you're talking about your motivation to go to grad school and maybe different characteristics that would make you a successful grad student that are outside of research backgrounds. So that could be like communication skills, things like that. Next, recommendation letters, then your CV, and then the diversity statement. But again, there's a lot of variation. It's also hard for professors to answer this kind of survey where they rate 1 through 5, because a lot of it can be, it depends. For example, a recommendation letter, they'll think it's more important if there's a lot more detail about you, or rather than if it's a generic recommendation letter. So this is just a general guide, and they may have interpreted each category a little bit differently. But again, it's the research stuff that matters. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what happens after you submit your applications, which is when you get invited to interview. It's written in person on the slide, but again, it might not be and isn't always. And it's more the case with PhD rather than master's programs. And so in-person interviews happen between January and March. And around the same time, acceptance letters are sent. So maybe about like a month after your interview, you could expect to hear by then. Sometimes they send you something a week later, but you'll get some decision before April. All right, so we'll talk about this interview weekend. Though with COVID, it's gonna be virtual, but you typically stay at a hotel or in the home of a graduate student. And I'm also saying weekend here, but with COVID, it might also be on weekdays if it's going to be virtual. And so you might have to plan to set time aside no matter what. It's going to be Thursday to Sunday, or maybe Thursday and Friday, something like that. So you meet with faculty for this interview. You generally have a day or a day and a half in which you do this, and they're between 30 minutes and an hour, and you'll probably meet with somewhere between 5 and 8 faculty. And you'll likely get a schedule ahead of time. And some of these faculty will be potential advisors that you've listed in your application, and some of them will be faculty that are on the admissions committee. And aside from this, throughout the weekend, you'll participate in a number of social events, mostly with just graduate students. So this could be going out to eat with the lab that you're considering joining, or going to a reception with faculty and grad students, going on a nature walk with grad students, things like that. And some things to keep in mind. As we said, it might be virtual. Do you mind clicking? Thanks. Conversations are going to be more casual, similar to when you have those initial chats with your potential advisors over video before submitting your application. And it's more casual in that they're not really going to be asking you pre-specified questions. It's not really like a formal interview. And the dress is more casual too. It's not business attire. People interviewing generally look put together, but wear more casual styles. But first and foremost, you should wear what makes you feel comfortable and confident throughout the day. And last, the interview goes both ways. We already talked about what the admissions committee and labs want to find out about you. So let's take a moment to talk about what you are there to find out. Oh, actually, we're doing that later. I forgot I added the slide. So more faculty survey results. Again, we asked those 31 professors what preparation they expect for a prospective graduate student that's interviewing either for their lab or not necessarily their lab, but in their program. So as we said, you might have meetings with professors that you don't actually want to join their lab. And so we gave different categories and they checked off all the things they expect. So let's start with a professor whose lab you would be interviewing for. So on the x-axis, we're showing the percent. So the percent of respondents that thought that each category is a good way to prepare for the meeting. And I've ordered them here, top to bottom is most consensus, least consensus that this is necessary. So if you're interviewing with a prospective or potential advisor, most of them, vast majority, expect you to be familiar with their research area. Most of them expect you to have read their research website to get an understanding of what they work on. Then it drops off a bunch. So fewer say that it's necessary to have a well-developed understanding of where the field is heading. And about a fourth of them also want you to have done work in their field, but not everybody. So there's some variation there. And obviously having done work in the field, that's not really preparation for an interview. It's just something that they might expect of you. And again, with answering these questions, it's another it depends kind of situation. So we got some open-ended feedback and we heard things like your standards are going to be different depending on maybe if somebody has a master's or background in the research area that they work on. They have some higher standards for the conversation that you're going to have. So maybe they should have a better understanding of what important questions in the field are or what their research ideas or interests are. So that is going to vary a little bit. Okay, so we can go to the next slide about the program. So say you're meeting with a professor who's affiliated with the program, but you don't want to join their lab. These professors expect much less of you, so you don't actually have to do that much preparation. About half of them want you to be familiar with their research area. Only less than half expect you to have read their research website. Very few want to really understand where their field is heading or have done work in the field. And so a big takeaway from this and from the open-ended feedback that we received is that faculty just really want to be able to have a conversation with you. If you're not interviewing for their lab, they want you to have a familiarity with their research area or to have read their research website so that you can ask them questions. They want to have an equal back and forth exchange where you talk about research. You can also talk about the program, but they're just trying to identify, are they talking about their research and can you respond? Even with the most basic questions, are you showing interest in research and in their kind of work? And so these are the things that you want to find out on interview weekends. We'll talk a bunch about these in the future and give you the tools for them, but you want to focus on whether the lab and program is a good fit for your research interests and whether you'll be happy in this lab, program, university, and town. And so we're listing here, we're going to list a bunch of aspects connected to these. that you can look over on your own, but for time, I'm just going to skip ahead to questions you should be asking because we're going to be talking about these in a week or two. So how to get informative answers to your questions. You should definitely be talking to graduate students and taking advantage of the fact that you're going to have so much time with graduate students on these interview weekends. And if you feel like everyone's focusing on the positives, maybe that means this program is truly perfect, but I bet it has some flaws. So you can try rephrasing your question. So you can ask, what's your least favorite thing about? Or what would you change about? Or has anyone in the lab, program, or department insert experience that you are worried about? You know, just directly ask about whether somebody has experienced what you do not want to experience, and you'll get more honest answers.
Awesome.
And then, oh, cool, you go for it.
Great. Okay, so the last day to apply is April 15th. And so, or accept, sorry, the last day to accept is April 15th. So they will send out offer letters after the interview weekend, and you will get a decision. And then usually you have to send that in before April 15th. So that could change, but this is the date most, I think, programs have. So just read the offer letter and it will clearly state it in that. Looks like folks are starting to come back. So why don't we go ahead and get started on how to talk about your research. And so I'm pretty sure by now that you know it's important to be comfortable talking about your research. So we first think that you should be specific. Here are some guidelines for talking of your research. So here you might want to include study systems, scaling, and subfield. So it could be, I like, so you could talk about working with plant systems, animal systems, fungal systems, microbiology and microbiome systems, as well as scaling to species across, within species, across species, within communities. Just want to be specific about the things you're interested in, as well as include questions that you want to ask or are asking. And so here, you want to, after you're kind of more broad, what you like, maybe specifically, I am thinking about these questions, so that now you're going from broad to narrow. And then you want to practice this elevator pitch of going from broad to narrow, right, with your peers and advisors. And so now we're going to kind of hump right back into those same breakout groups. And we are going to give about the same time for everyone to go through, about 7 minutes, and say their breakout, say their elevator pitch. So, take a moment now while I'm speaking to jot down a few notes to prepare for this. And so we also want mentors and facilitators to provide some feedback at the end of everyone's elevator pitches, if there is time. Again, you can, share these afterwards with your mentors, and so when you do go into the breakout groups, mentors, please give your examples first, and then students will have a chance to workshop their own. And so now let's go ahead and jump. Welcome back, everyone, as we're waiting for more folks to trickle in, and I know it's about the end. Go ahead and fill out the workshop feedback form whenever you get a chance. And if I could have that in the chat, I'm going to just grab it here. And here is the feedback form for in the chat. We really appreciate your feedback, and we're working to make this program more better for next year, and so your feedback is super valuable. And this is how we've kind of implemented a lot of changes from last year's program to this year's program. And so we do read these, and we really appreciate when you guys take the time to fill them out. So thank you for doing that. And for the sake of time, I am going to go to the next slide. Please fill this out. Again, it's in the chat. So next, this Thursday, we have office hours. And so again, that's just going to be us in this Zoom room waiting for you guys to do some question and answers. This is a great time to meet other participants and to meet mentors and facilitators and ask those questions that are really for your situation or a broader question. And there are no limits to the questions. And we want to invite you guys to dig deeper with us. So you can chat with your mentor, also visit our website. This is where we are going to be posting the videos when they are up. And so be on the lookout for that. We also have a Twitter page. We also have an Instagram, which is not up here, but we will get it up here. And you can contact us by email. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. And thanks for being a little flexible with your time and generous. And we will see you on Thursday or next week.
And I just dropped the Instagram. If you're into Instagram, it's just at EE Grad Preview. So same as our Twitter handle.